So guys, how are you? What if Naruto and Akeno want revenge on Konoha movie 2? Naruto opened his blue eyes only to discover that he was in the same room where he had woken up last time. But now with a slight change, which was a big hole in the ceiling. I see you're finally awake, young. He heard a female voice by his side, a voice that he had never heard before in his life. Standing on the bed, he was turning back. When he landed at a distance from the bed, he saw that the woman was an elderly lady who looked a little like the blonde he had seen before falling unconscious. Calm down, honey. I won't hurt you, she said with a reassuring smile. Nobody here will hurt you, I promise. Naruto looked at the woman with a lot of distrust. After what happened in the Valley of the End with Sasuke and Kakashi, he was not willing to trust anyone so easily. Who are you and where are the men from before? He asked as he looked at the woman sitting in his chair who just kept smiling at him kindly. My name is Frigga, and the men you saw earlier are my son Thor and my husband Odin, he said as he rose from his chair, but as soon as she did that, the blonde took several steps back to maintain the distance between them. Approaching the window, Naruto saw that what Thor had told him before was true. If the neglect to jump through the window of the room where he was would fall to certain death. He was sure that even using his chakra he could survive a fall from the height he was in. Chakra. Now that he thought about it, since he woke up he had not been able to feel his chakra, closing his eyes momentarily trying to feel it but could not. Instead he felt another type of energy, a much more powerful than his chakra and denser. Opening his eyes he saw that the woman had disappeared from his place. Looking everywhere he did not find her. It seems he left thought after not seeing the woman anywhere. Seeing that the woman had gone, the blonde knew that this would be the best opportunity he would have to escape. Although now that he thought about it, even if he managed to escape he had no place to go and he didn't know where he was either. He couldn't return to Konoha, not after what Kakashi told him. And although he returned, as much as possible is that he be killed by the copying ninja or by the same old Hokage. But even if things were like that he couldn't stay in this strange place. The first one would take care to get out of where he was and then think about what to do. Going out the door, the blonde began to walk down the great hallway outside the room where he was. While he was walking, he heard footsteps and people talking, so he quickly ran to a nearby pillar and hid behind it so that no one would. I saw. After a few seconds he saw two men dressed in strange gold-colored armor with long red capes which almost touched the ground. After the Uzumaki saw that the guards disappeared, he used everything he learned about stealth at the Konoha Ninja Academy and during his prankster days to escape from the immense castle where he was. The place was immense and took almost a time to find a door that would take him out of the gigantic golden-colored castle. During that hour he was looking for a way out, the tube that dodged many guards who were apparently patrolling. The tube that admitted that the guards of this place did know how to make a patrol, since while trying to escape he had almost been discovered by a pair of guards who had left a room which looked like a weapons room. But luckily for the blonde Uzumaki, no one found or discovered him while he tried to escape from the great castle. So after an hour of searching he arrived at a large double door which were open and unattended. So after making sure there was no one near the path to the great double door which seemed to be made of pure gold. As soon as he walked through the big golden doors, Naruto could not prevent his eyes from opening as they had never opened in his entire life. He had never seen anything as beautiful and magnificent as what he was seeing right now. The view of the city in front of him was 10 times better than what he had obtained in his old house. The whole city seemed to be made of gold. From his position he could see a lot of buildings which were so large that they seemed to reach the sky. He also saw a lot of people walking everywhere, many of whom stared at him for a few seconds before follow his path. But the best thing was that everyone had seen him with curious looks. Very different from the looks of hatred and contempt he received when he was in Konoha. Looking up at the sky he saw what appeared to be ships flying through the sky as if by magic. In the distance Naruto saw a huge bridge, larger than the bridge that the old Tazuna had built in the country of the waves, but the most surprising thing about the bridge was not its enormous size, but that it shone with the colors of a rainbow, and without a doubt, the view in front of Uzumaki was the most impressive of all. This is impressive, he said to himself as he kept looking at the big city in front of him. I had never seen anything as impressive as this. Yes, there is no place in the world that can compare to Asgard, said Thor as he appeared behind the blonde. This is one of the most beautiful places in the whole world, said the god behind the youngest blonde. Naruto quickly leapt back as he stood guard to fight the blonde man who appeared behind him with his hammer in hand. Seeing how the blonde was placed in a position ready to fight, he raised his hands in surrender as he stepped back. Calm down, Naruto. I don't want to fight with you or hurt you. I just want to talk, that's all, he said, taking another step back. Naruto looked the man in the eye and saw that he was telling her the truth completely, so he calmed down a bit, but still he was not under guard. He was not willing to lower her. Fine, but don't get close to me, he said as he turned to see the impressive city. What is this place exactly? He asked as he looked confused as a couple of girls his age smiled at him while they blushed a little. This is Asgard, the city of the Asgardian gods, he said as he watched as the girls looked at the blonde. Naruto's eyes widened when I heard that. Gods, you mean that you and everyone here are gods? I asked, completely surprised. Thor shook his head as he looked at the blonde. Not everyone here. Many are just beings with great power and great abilities. Only my father Odin, who is the father of all Asgardians, is the supreme god here. My mother, who is the mother of everything. My half-brother Loki, who is the god of lies and deception, and finally I am the god of thunder, or at least for now, he said with a mysterious smile. Naruto was confused about what the man said, so he decided to ask him, for now, what do you mean by that? Asked the full of curiosity. My father wants to retire and wants me to become the new father of everything so that I can rule in Asgard as the supreme god. That's good. No. Now you will be the new leader of all this land and its people, he said as he remembered his old dream of becoming the Konoha Hokage, something that can never happen now. On the one hand yes, but on the other hand my place is on the battlefield. I am not yet done to sit on the throne and rule over Asgard. He tried to take a step closer to the blonde, but that caused him to turn. The youngest blonde took a step further from the. Besides, before that I have to look for a worthy successor who inherits my power and my hammer Mjolnir, he said as he showed the hammer to the blonde, and I am thinking that person could be your Naruto. Confusion and surprise took over Uzumaki's face. Naruto said, confused as he pointed to himself. That's Naruto, the current god of thunder, said with a smile on his face. Tell me, young Naruto, that is the last thing you can remember before you were previously unconscious. Naruto was confused by the man's question, recalling the attempt to remember that it was the last one he saw or did before he passed out a second time. I remember that the old man was approaching me, but that's it. I can't remember anything else, he said while looking at the man, or rather god. Thor looked at the blonde before turning his hammer a couple of times and showing it to Uzumaki. Once this Naruto hammer. This is a very special hammer since only a few people can hold it due to a strong spell placed on it, and only people who are worthy and pure-hearted can lift it and handle all its incredible power, he said while he placed the hammer on the floor and took a couple of steps back. So I want you to try to lift it, Naruto, he said as he pointed to the weapon of the gods. Naruto saw the hammer on the floor, shrugging. The one walked towards him. The blonde ducked and tried to lift it, and surprisingly for him the hammer was incredibly heavy. Heavier than anything else he had tried to lift in his life, so that by planting his feet firmly on the ground he kept trying to lift the heavy hammer, which slowly became lighter until he could lift it completely. Because it doesn't feel as heavy as it used to be, he said as he lifted the hammer with one hand, throwing it into the air. He caught it with his other hand. It's as light as a feather. That's because the hammer considers you a worthy person with a pure heart, said Thor as he looked at the blonde and the hammer. That's why you can hold it so easily, Naruto, because he knows that you are not a person with no evil in your heart. Before Naruto could say anything, he saw how everything suddenly went dark. Looking up at the sky, he saw how a lot of dark clouds covered the beautiful blue sky. Thunder, lightning and lightning began to descend from the sky quickly. The blonde had to jump a few times to avoid being hit by one of the many rays that were falling from the now dark sky. What's going on? He asked as he prevented another lightning from splitting it in two. It was as if the rays were rising where he was. Thor smiled a little when he saw Naruto jump again to avoid lightning followed by two flashes. Calm down, Naruto. Everything will be fine. Raising his hand in lightning, he fell on it and covered it completely. Once this is nothing. This is the power of the Naruto hammer. Whoever owns it can obtain my power to control thunder. Get scared. Nothing bad will happen to you. Looking at the named god of thunder, Naruto nodded and let a lightning bolt go over him. When the lightning covered his body, he felt like his whole body was filled with power. Although he also felt something else running through his body. Something he could not identify, but whatever it was made him feel good, feel powerful and invincible. Feeling a tingle throughout his body, he looked at himself and watched as his whole body began to change. Suddenly he felt himself getting a little taller. His muscle mass began to grow a little more while a strange armor resembling that of Thor began to cover his body. I guess the armor also comes with the hammer, he said after seeing the armor that covered his entire body. That's Naruto. The armor is also part of the Mjolnir, along with the ability to fly, an incredible super force, and as I told you, the ability to control thunder and all those things. Looking at his hand, the son of Odin saw how he lost half of his powers. That's good, but the blonde shouted when he felt his hand began to slowly warm up as if he was burning. Watching the Mjolnir in his hand, he saw that he was moving from side to side while his wizard was it turned red. It was as if the hammer wanted to break free of his hand, and for that he had begun to warm up. So opening his hand, the libero the hammer which shot out of his hand to Thor's. As soon as the libero the hammer stopped his hand, Looking at her he saw that it had a great and ugly burn which began to dwarf and disappear. When the pain disappeared completely he looked at the bearer of the Mjolnir. What does this mean, Thor? I asked, looking at the older blonde. Does this mean that the Mjolnir rejected me? What, am I not worthy? The confusion could be clearly seen on the face of the mighty god of thunder while he looked at the blonde. Honestly, Naruto, I don't know why that happened, he said as he looked at the Mateo in his hand. After that he looked back at the younger blonde. But what I am sure of is that he didn't reject you because you could hold it in your hands. If he had rejected you, you would not even have been able to move it. I just think that you need a little more training before you can master it, he said as he looked at the smallest blonde who had grown a little. So what do you say, Naruto? You would want to stay and become my successor, become the next god of thunder, he asked with a small smile on his face. Naruto stared at the man while he thought about his offer. If he stayed he could start from scratch, with no hateful looks. No mistreatment from his companions or lies from them. No one knew him or the fox he has in his in addition. He did not know if he could return to his dimension, and if he did he had nowhere to go. He had been almost killed by his sensei and teammate. He also had no one to worry about him or miss him. Looking at the man he made his decision. So nodding his head he spoke with a look full of determination on his face. If Thor, I want to stay and become your successor, he said, he would stay, he would become strong, very strong, as strong as he could, and if one day he would return to Konoha the Aryan, everyone would pay to betray him, to lie to him and to want to kill him. Everyone will pay with their lives for having lied and betrayed me. Without Naruto noticing, the sky darkened a little more as more lightning sounded in the sky. Not knowing what was going on in the blonde's head, Thor smiled as he watched the blonde. Then get ready, Naruto, because this will be the hardest and most intense entertainment you will ever have in your life, he said as he smiled in a way that caused the blonde to shiver. 8 years later, Naruto bent down while nimbly dodging a spear of one of the Asgardian soldiers who had him surrounded. Lifting the blonde Mjolnir with a lightning bolt which he used to attack the poor man who had attacked him before. Turning to use his free hand to stop a sword, the man who owned the sword tried to release his sword with all his strength from Naruto's hand but could not since he was holding it tightly. That was a mistake, Naruto said before lifting the hammer and hitting the man with him in the center of his chest with such force that he sent him against a wall where he crashed and was unconscious. I think I got a little excited, thought as he looked at the soldier on the ground. If he had hit him harder, the poor man might have died. Looking around, the blonde saw that there were only 40 men of the 100 with whom he had begun to fight. Grabbing the hammer by a small rope that he had at the bottom of the handle. Raising it above his head, he began to turn it quickly, creating a small tornado around it. All the guards began to sweat quickly when they saw that a smile of emotion appeared on the blonde's face. Even being in the tornado, they could see his dangerous smile. Turning around, everyone was ready to run and hide when they saw how the blonde began to rise from the ground while the tornado continued to revolve around him. Oh shit, was the last thing one of the guards said before being hit in the chest by a powerful lightning bolt that shot out from the tornado that protected Naruto. Smiling behind the tornado, the Uzumaki released the hammer he had in his hand, making it begin to spin around him and crush all the guards of the kingdom trying to escape or face it. Landing in front of a group of 5, he raised his hand towards them as if he were waiting for something. All the guards in front of Naruto turned their heads and turned pale when they saw that the Mjolnir was coming directly towards them. All the guards in front of Naruto flew through the sky when the Mjolnir hit them in the back. Lowering his hand, the blonde let the hammer go long and crash into the face of a guard who wanted to attack him from behind. With the last guard knocked down, Naruto raised his hand, causing the Mjolnir to return to him before placing him on his shoulder right. Naruto looked at all the guards on the ground with a smile on his face. Some were unconscious, some were only lying on the ground while they were resting. While the unfortunates who were hit by the Mjolnir or by one of the lightning bolts it generated, they were groaning in pain. Come on guys, I don't know why you are complaining so much. You know this is nothing compared to my other thoughts, he said as he watched as some of the layers on the ground gave him glaring glances. Since Naruto had begun his training with Thor 8 years ago, the blonde had discovered that he liked to fight, but not only to fight but to fight and beat powerful people. For the past 8 years he had faced off against all the best that Asgard he has been able to throw him, and almost always he was victorious. Against the only people he always lost in a fight was against Thor, the half-brother of this one called Loki, Odin and a few Valkyrias, but apart from them everyone else had been defeated and crushed by him, which always made him smile the same way he was smiling now. Come on guys, we are having fun. I don't think so, Naruto-sama, a guard said as he rose from the ground clutching his aching chest. Only you would call him having fun to face 100 men just after finishing an 8-hour workout. Leaning back from a wall, the guard proceeded to remove the front part of his armor to breathe better. Naruto smiled as he looked at the man. He recognized him as the one he had hit in the chest with the hammer. Well, one of them, since he had lost count of how many guards he had hit in the chest with his hammer. Well, you said it yourself, it was just an 8-hour physical training. Just before he faced all the guards he had trained and faced Thor for 8 hours straight with only 15 minutes of rest every hour. But you know you're right. This is no fun. Let's call it a warm-up, so how about this? You will rest for 5 minutes and then start again, he said as he watched as some of those present became completely pale just thinking about having to face him again. I am sorry, Naruto-sama, but I have a guard in half an hour, said a different guard than he had spoken the first time. He had dark skin and only one eye on his face. And another said, me too, sir. My wife is at home almost giving birth, sir. So I have to go with her, another said as he rose from the ground. I have to travel to the human world for some supplies. I am not even here today. While I am on call, Naruto watched as one by one his opponents began to say that they had to guard all Asgard and other excuses. Many of which could be true, but most were only inventing excuses so as not to fight him again. Putting that looked like a face of disappointment, the blonde looked at them all. Too bad. And I thought to buy beers for everyone after training, he said, causing everyone's eyes to open. Both the guards who were on the floor and those who stood firmly while looking at the blonde and began to say that their schedule had been changed for later and that they could stay a little longer. Fine then, because we don't start again, he said before aiming his hammer at the sky. Lightning struck the sky from Naruto's hammer, who then threw himself against the guards again. Not far from where Naruto was, Thor was watching the blonde's performance. He saw how Naruto had improved as no person in his life had done. The blonde had exceeded all his expectations in an incredible and positive way. His strength, endurance and intelligence were at the same level of many people who led him many years of life. Although not everything went well, Naruto had taken a whole year to allow a person to get close to him both physically and emotionally. Everyone who tried to get too close ended up being a victim of lightning thrown from the hand of blonde Uzumaki. But after a year the barrier he had created with everyone around him had disappeared. In his second year of staying in Asgard, he had decided to tell all members of the Asgard royal family about his past. He had told everyone about the abuse, beatings, insults and all other bad things that they had happened to him in Konoha. He had also told them everything Kakashi had told him and how everyone in town was only using it at his convenience. After he had told them that it had to be necessary all the strength of Odin along with almost all the guards of the castle to stop him since he was willing to travel to the former dimension of the blonde and destroy everyone in that corrupt village and degenerated. After he had calmed down he had promised Naruto that no one would hurt him that way again. So that would not happen he had increased the training of the blonde almost to triple in the tube to admit that the results brought a big smile to his face. He had taken the blonde to the limit and made him break those limits with each new training. The blonde had become a master of both the sword and the use of the spear. He also had so much control over the Mjolnir that he could almost compare himself to it, and most of all, no one knew that the younger blonde continued so he could overcome it very soon. The thunder god Thor's eyes narrowed when he saw Naruto start to growl because the Mjolnir had burned his hand again for him to release. Raising his hand he took the hammer and examined it. Even after 8 years the Mjolnir continued to reject Naruto after a certain time, and even they had not been able to discover the reason for that. Looking at the blonde he saw how he fired all the guards to have a couple of beers before starting to walk towards the stroking the hand already healed. One thing that surprised everyone was that even without the power of the fox within its alarming healing factor it was still active. Apparently you reached your limit again. Now you can last a full hour with the Mjolnir in your possession before he rejects you, he said as he looked at the blonde who stopped in front of him. Naruto looked at the man who had changed his life completely. Thanks to Thor and his offer he was much stronger than ever before in his life. He knew for sure that if he was still in his old dimension he would never have been able to get such strength and power. I still don't know why that happens. I already proved that I am worthy of being his bearer, but he still rejects me, he said as he looked at the long-haired man. I think I could answer that for you, said a very familiar voice to them. Turning around they both saw Frigga, Thor's mother, giving a warm smile to both of them. Frigga looked at his son and Naruto. Since the blonde had arrived he had changed everyone's life. Since he opened up to them and had allowed the cell people to approach he had dedicated himself to help in everything possible to pay everything what they had done for him. Every time he was not training he was helping in everything he could and to everyone who could. In just 8 years the blonde had earned a very special place in the hearts of many people within Asgard, including her and her family. Mother, Thor said as he looked at the woman who had brought him into the world. They finally discovered what happens to Naruto and the hammer, he asked. After telling the problem between Naruto and the Mjolnir to everyone in his family, Thor saw how his mother analyzed Naruto to find an explanation for that problem. but unfortunately she couldn't find anything at the time, and because of that she has spent the last few years trying to find a solution to that problem or the reason for that problem. Frigga nodded as she looked at the blonde who stared at her at all times. Yes. Right now I came to receive the last analysis of the young Naruto, and thanks to that we could discover what causes the Mjolnir to reject him. She spoke before forming a magic circle in her hand. A hologram of the body of the blonde appeared in the middle of a magic circle so everyone could see him. Naruto was completely amazed when he discovered that the people of this world did not use chakra but another form of energy called magic, which was more condensed than the chakra and more versatile. He had seen all the different uses that magic had as well as different spells that could be made and created with it. Many of the spells reminded the fuinjutsus of which he had read so much in the ninja library. He had learned many different spells and all caused great destruction, but none like his power over lightning and thunder, which could only be overcome by Thor himself. So what happens between the hammer and me? He asked as he looked at the woman. According to the latest data gathered from your last analysis, it seems that the entire chakra of your body was replaced by magic. Even the beast that was inside you disappeared from your body, leaving only a large deposit of pure magic. She said, surprising her son and the youngest blonde. Apparently all that happened because of your brief stay in the dimensional gap and the arrival in this world where there is not enough chakra to keep yours stable, so that is why your body began to change the whole chakra by magic to keep you alive, which caused the kyubi inside you to disappear forever, he said before pausing to see if they were both keeping track of him. That part one understand, mother. But what I do not understand is because the Mjolnir continues to reject Naruto. Thor spoke while looking at his mother. I was about to get to that, son. Apparently the Mjolnir is not rejecting Naruto. In fact, the opposite. The Mjolnir cannot withstand all the power that runs through Naruto's body, so he tries to free himself from it before he is destroyed by the power of Naruto. Which means that if Naruto does not release the Mjolnir when it starts to overheat, it can end up being destroyed due to the large amount of power that Naruto's body generates, she said as she looked at the younger blonde. Thor looked at Naruto. He knew that the blonde's power was greater than that, because every time he used all his powers his eyes changed in a very different way. Also his control over thunder was almost surpassing the of the. Then you were saying that Naruto's power is great, that the Mjolnir can't help you, he said, making his mother nod. Naruto looked at his hands. Concentrating a little, he saw how his hands began to generate a lot of electrical energy. Looking up at the sky, his eyes turned white and the whole sky above them began to darken and flash. He could feel all the power that ran through his body, all the power that shouted out to be released in a fierce and brutal way. Naruto closed his eyes for a few seconds, and when he opened them again he began to bow slowly. Opening his eyes he made all the clouds of storms disappear and his eyes returned to normal as he descended to the ground. Looking at the mother duo, son, the blonde spoke. So that means I can't become your successor, Thor? He asked. The man looked at the blonde and saw a kind of disappointment on his face. He knew how excited Naruto got every time he finished one of his many workouts to become his successor. Everything he had done and all the way that he had traveled so far had only been to achieve that goal. Looking at his mother, he saw how she nodded. Don't worry about that, Naruto. Even without the Mjolnir you have enough power to one day be the next god of Asgard's thunder. Naruto placed a small smile on his face as he looked at the god of thunder. Hearing someone calling him by his name, turning around saw that the person who was calling him was one of the guards with whom he was entering, said that he would take a beer with them. Smiling, he looked at the mother and son. Go ahead, Naruto, go. Have fun, Thor's mother said before the blonde could say something. Thank you, my lady, he said as he bowed a little. See you later, sensei, he said, and Thor just nodded. That boy will achieve great things someday, Thor said as he looked at his future successor as the god of thunder. Yes, I see a great future for him, Frigga said looking at the retired blonde. I just hope to live long enough to see it, she said quietly before leaving. 1 year later, 365 days had passed since Naruto learned what his power was doing to the Mjolnir, and since that day he had stopped training with him and had better concentrated more on controlling his immense power, which continued to grow uncontrollably. Due to that, every time the blonde had a kind of nightmare or was very stressed, his power was released uncontrollably and destroyed everything around him. On several occasions he had destroyed his entire room while dreaming and remembering everything that had happened to Kakashi and Sasuke in the Valley of the End. And during one of those nights of nightmares, Thor tried to wake him up and they both ended up having a fierce fight. Due to that, when he opened his eyes he did not see Thor, but that the person he saw in front of him went to Kakashi. When he managed to enter himself again, half the castle was in ruins. The only good thing about it was that no one died or was seriously injured. Many of the Asgardians who had seen the fight started calling Naruto the god of thunder as well as Thor. Of course that didn't matter to the older blonde and let people keep calling the younger blonde that way. Because of that, now in Asgard there were two god of thunder. Currently Naruto and Thor were walking through the lands of the dwarf kingdom called Nidavellir, which was under the care and protection of Asgard. The blonde had heard a lot about Nidavellir because that place was where the most powerful weapons of the entire universe, such as the Mjolnir and many of the weapons used by the Asgardian elite warriors in the Valkyria. While walking, Naruto saw endless dwarves. Some were working on the forge of new weapons while others were drunk and others were sleeping. Looking at the god of thunder, the blonde asked him the question that has been on his mind since they decided to come to this place. So Thor, what are we doing in this place? The blonde asked as he looked at the god who had a smile on his face. Thor smiled a little more while looking at the blonde. Do you remember what day Naruto is today? He asked looking at the blonde. Naruto was confused by the man's question, but still he decided to answer it. October 10th, he said simply. And that means that today is your birthday. Naruto was surprised that Thor remembered his birthday. Hell, he hadn't even remembered that because when he was in Konoha the only thing he received as a congratulation were the cold looks of the villagers and ninjas of the town. It didn't help that that was the same day it was celebrated the Fox's attack on the village and its defeat at the hands of Minato Namikaze. So as a gift I brought you here to meet Eitri the Dwarf King who personally formed my hammer, he said as he looked at the man working. And speaking of the devil, look at him there. Naruto stopped dead when he saw the named Eitri. After that, blonde looked at Thor and then at the man and repeated the same action a couple more times before speaking. You're not really serious, Naruto said as he gave Thor a strange look. What do you mean, Naruto? I don't understand you, asked the confused blonde. The blonde looked at Thor as he pointed to one of the place's dwarves. That is a dwarf. That is another and that is another, he said as he pointed to two more. But this is a giant fucking, he said as he looked at the tall and imposing dwarf king who had turned to see them. What did you call me, boy? Said the man as he approached the blonde with a large mallet in his hand. Naruto looked at the man without any hint of fear on his face. He had never faced a dwarf before, but he had faced one or another giant which were much larger and more frightening than the dwarf king in front of him. It is not for offending or anything, but you are anything but a dwarf. I say, just look at your size. You are almost 5 times larger than everyone here. Eitri looked at Naruto for a few seconds before smiling and putting his hand on the blonde's shoulder. Hard. Very hard, if they asked the blonde, since he had to grimace when the man's palm hit his shoulder. A palm that it was almost twice as big as his head. I like this guy, he said as he patted Naruto a couple of times, making him almost scream in pain when he felt his shoulder was about to break. But luckily for him the great dwarf stopped doing that. So, Eitri is ready? Thor asked, making the man nod. If it's almost complete, just a few adjustments are missing, he said as he turned around and began to walk. Follow me. Naruto stared at both men while they talked about something apparently very important. Following both men, the blonde approached a large boiler which was filled with a material which he recognized as the same steel that was used to create the Mjolnir. All the material was melting rapidly due to the high temperatures in which the boiler was located where he was. Shit, this is burning, Uzumaki said as he moved away from the hot boiler. A snort came out of Eitri's lips as he looked at the blonde. Nanita, he said before walking to the boiler. The Uzumaki watched in amazement as Eitri approached the big boiler, and when he saw that all the steel had completely melted, he turned it with his own bare hands without even making a small complaint or grimacing at touching the super hot boiler. The blonde saw how the dwarf king poured all the molten metal into an axe-shaped mold. After that he picked up a wooden handle and placed it inside the mold, and surprisingly it did not catch on or burn due to the high temperature of the molten metal. After a few seconds, Naruto watched as Eitri took his big mallet and began hitting the mold hard. The sparks flew all over the place just like the sound of metal hitting the metal. Naruto saw all this completely astonished and fascinated. He had seen how many kinds of weapons were forged for nothing like what he was seeing now. What is this, Thor? What is happening? He asked without being able to endure the desire and curiosity to know what the man was forging. This is the weapon of a god, Eitri said as he turned his head to look at the blonde, and although he was looking at Naruto his hands kept hitting the metal he had cast. The weapon of a god, Naruto repeated confused. Yes. When Thor learned about your problem with the Mjolnir, he asked me to build a weapon that could hold and control all your power, the Dwarf King said as he created a magic circle on what he was forging. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. Directing his gaze to Thor, he saw that he was smiling at him. That's right? Asked the surprised. Nobody had ever given him anything or done something similar. The only thing he had received before arriving here were looks of hatred and teasing from all the people around him. Thor nodded as he looked at the surprised blonde. That's Naruto. I told you that I would make you my successor, and I will. Naruto had to endure the desire to release a couple of tears. Nobody had ever worried so much about how Thor and his whole family had done it. Since he opened up to them, they had treated him as part of his family. Well, at least almost every. Thank you, Naruto said quietly, but still the god of thunder heard him. You're welcome. Thor said as he watched as King Eitri disappeared the magic circle and took the mallet again to continue hitting his creation. After almost 5 minutes Eitri stopped hitting the axe mold with his giant mallet, turning to look at the younger blonde. It is ready. The only thing missing is that you hit it with your most powerful lightning, so boy, show me all your power. Show me the power that Thor talks about so much, the dwarf said as he moved away from the AXS mold. Naruto nodded as he closed his eyes to concentrate better. His entire body began releasing electric shocks all over the place. Both Thor and Eitri had to take several steps back when Naruto's entire body began firing lightning and electrical energy everywhere. Even the dwarves who were working in other areas had to cover themselves so as not to be hit by one of the blonde's rays. So much power. This is amazing, Eitri said while looking at the blonde boy. Yes, but this is still not all. This is only half of Naruto's power, he said, surprising the dwarf king. Is there even more? The bearded dwarf asked, and Thor nodded. Then I see why it was that you asked me to build this weapon. It is impossible that the Mjolnir can withstand unless control so much power. Naruto opened his eyes, showing everyone that they had changed color. Now the blonde's eyes were almost white. It has fallen back all the blue they had, and now they were only almost as white as the sclera of the eyes. In the blonde's hand a large electric ball formed which was almost the size of his body. Looking at the mold he saw that it was beginning to cool. So before that happened he added a little more of his power to the sphere in his hands before throwing all that power against the axe mold that Eitri was forging. For a minute Naruto kept unloading the biggest and most powerful lightning bolt he had ever created in his life. After a minute and having unloaded all, the new power god of Asgard fell on one of his knees a little exhausted. He may not have used all his power completely, but that does not mean that he did not feel a little exhausted from the effort he had made. In fact, he hadn't used so much power since his last fight against Thor. Eitri quickly ran to the axe with a smile on his face. He saw how it was red hot, so he used mallet, hit it several times, causing the mold to break and show everyone the incredible weapon he had finished creating. Before the eyes of the whole weapon began to float and turn while shooting small rays in all directions. Slowly the weapon continued to spin as it approached Naruto. Seeing this, the only Uzumaki in Asgard raised his right hand and took what his new weapon would be, and as soon as Naruto touched the weapon he could feel how tired he felt. Completely disappeared quickly, as if it had never existed. Rising from the I usually turn his axe a few times before placing it on his right shoulder. Perfect, he said before looking at the king of the dwarves, as it is called. He asked. Stormbreaker, Eitri replied while looking at the younger blonde. I think it's a bit ostentatious, Thor said as he looked at Naruto's gun. It is the weapon of a god, which I expected. Mjolnir too, Eitri replied while looking at the Odin-san. No, but something more simple and modest, the Mjolnir owner said. He can also invoke the Bifrost, he said, surprising both blonde men. Also, what else can this weapon do? Thor asked as he looked at the blonde's axe. What, are you jealous? Eitri asked while looking at the older blonde. I don't, just say the name is a bit ostentatious, that's all. For me it is a perfect name, Naruto. While looking at the gun besides me, Naruto was silenced when a powerful lightning bolt crossed the entire roof from where they were and fell on him, causing an intense light to cover him and illuminate the whole place. When the light stopped a few seconds later, everyone could see that Naruto had changed a bit. His eyes were no longer blue or the flashing blue they had when he used all his power. In fact, his eyes did not exist. Now where previously his eyes were, now there were only two large white grounds without pupils or irises. It was like looking into a white paint canister. From time to time a small lightning could be seen coming out of them. His clothing was also something else that he had changed for armor the same as Thor had, but in a little darker and with some slight changes. His body was something else that had changed too. His muscle mass increased a little more than before. Thor saw the change of the boy and could not help but be surprised by his new appearance. Naruto, is you? Are you all right? He asked, a little worried about the blonde boy. If I feel completely good, in fact, I have never felt better, the blonde replied as he looked at his new armor. Why do your eyes know that way? Eitri asked while looking at the blonde and his eyes, or rather their lack. Normally his eyes turn a white-blue color when he uses his powers, but now I don't know what's wrong with him. I had never seen anything like that before, he said as he looked at the blonde. My eyes? What do my eyes have? Naruto asked, confused since he could not feel anything strange in his eyes. In fact, it was quite the opposite now. He could see clearer and better than before. Instead of answering Thor, he took a sword that was close to him and placed it on his face so that he could see its reflection in it. What the fuck, he said while putting his hands to his eyes. What the fuck is wrong with my eyes, or rather where the hell are they? He asked. Although his eyes had disappeared, he was still looking good. In fact, he could see better than before. Don't you feel anything strange in your eyes, boy? A nuisance? itching or something?" Itri asked. Naruto shook his head. "Nothing, I don't feel anything bad with my eyes," he said. Thor looked at Naruto for a second before speaking. "Apparently the Stormbreaker not only allows you to control and release all your power, but also changes your appearance completely in the same way that the Mjolnir does. If that can be, since every time I used the Mjolnir I felt as if something was holding me back, but now I feel like all the power flows freely," he said while closing his eyes for a few seconds. When Naruto lived opening his eyes, these were in their normal form and all the changes he had disappeared completely. Looking at the big axe in his hands, the blonde frowned a little. "What's wrong, Naruto? Something bothers you?" Thor asked. "It's not just that I feel it would be a bit awkward to always walk with her in my hands." "Then why don't you use the transformation spell to transform into something else like I always do with the Mjolnir?" "See," said Thor while creating a magic circle and transforming the Mjolnir into a mahogany stick. Naruto hit his forehead for not thinking about it, doing the same thing Thor did when he transformed his Stormbreaker into a collar and placed it around his neck. "Well, now that's much better," he told himself. "Well, now that this is resolved, get out of this place," Itri said as he turned to leave. Before the man could leave completely, Naruto bowed to the "Thank you very much for everything, Itri-sama." The Dwarf King just turned his head and gave a small growl before leaving completely. Thor placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, causing him to straighten. "Congratulations, Naruto likes you," he said while confusing the blonde. "Itri is a little complicated man. If you would not have liked him at the same time that you called him a giant, he would hit you right in the head with his great war mallet." Naruto paled a little. He had already received a couple of pats on the back from the man and almost broke his shoulder and back. He did not want to know what would have happened if he received a blow with the mallet of the man in his head. "Well, then I am grateful that that had not happened." "Yes, you don't want that to happen," Thor said as he smiled, "but putting that aside, it's time for us to return home, Naruto," he said, and Naruto nodded as he turned around and started walking to leave the place where they were. And by the way, Naruto," Thor said, making the blonde look at him directly. "Happy birthday," he said with a smile on his face. Naruto smiled as he looked at the man. Thank you very much," he said as a small tear ran down his cheek. Naruto was flying through the dark sky of the human world. From the first day that the floor of the human world he fell in love with completely. While flying, the blonde could not help comparing this world with the world where he came from. Modernity, technology, people and even animals were all different from the world where he came from. Even the air was better than his previous world. In this world there was no constant tension and fear that a war broke out as it was in their world. If it is true that humans had 2 world wars, but that was already many years ago, and the only war that could be seen was that of the 3 factions which had several years. It had read everything Asgard had about each one of the factions, his powers, abilities and weaknesses, as well as his leaders, and sincerely he could not understand how they could still continue their war for so many years. And all because Lucifer and his 72 followers rebelled against God, who as a punishment burned their white wings and sent them to the bottom of the earth and directly to the place currently known as Hell, where they went from being angels to being demons, no long after the banishment of Lucifer and his people. Many angels began to question the decision of their creator and began to commit sins, which caused him to banish them as well. That led to discontent for God spreading throughout the sky to such an extent that many of the angels began to move away from the teachings of their creator, which in turn caused those angels to also be sent to hell. But unlike Lucifer and the first fallen, they did not become demons, but God made their beautiful white wings stain black so that all who saw them would know that they were no longer welcome in heaven. Those black-winged angels were known as fallen angels, the angels of sin and corruption, beings as cursed as the demons, and that like the demons they should be exterminated to eliminate all the evil in the world. For Naruto, it seemed like a great stupidity to fight for so many years, to lose thousands of men and women just for an old resentment, just for being expelled from heaven. Since he began to leave Asgard and know the human world, he had several encounters with members of all species who attacked him first. Of course he defended himself from them and defeated them all easily. But that only caused Odin to bother a little with him, since according to the old god that could have been taken as a declaration of war from Asgard against the 3 main factions which could cause them to attack Asgard in retaliation. Of course, he had told Odin and everyone that the first member of one of the 3 factions to set foot in Asgard in a hostile manner would take care of frying him personally, but that was not enough to calm the father's wrath of everything, so as punishment the old man forbade him from stepping on the human world again without his permission. But as usual he never listened and did what he thought was best. While flying through the dark sky, Naruto noticed something that caught his attention. Descending a little, he could see a redhead demon next to another female demon and with silver hair. Both seemed to be exhausted and both were surrounded by fallen angels. all of whom had spears of light in their hands. Naruto looked at everything with his calm eyes. He could go down and help those demons fight the fallen angels. But if he did that, he could end up getting Asgard into a problem with that faction, or he could also go his way and ignore everything he saw. He knew that this was the most logical option for him, but could he live with that, knowing he could help someone and did nothing? He did not know the demons, but he could see that they were not bad since the red-haired boy had stood in front of the silver-haired girl to protect her from the fallen angels. As he quickly descended, Naruto cursed his hero complex, which always made him want to save and help anyone he saw in danger. Everyone in Asgard told him that one day he would be killed, and he knew it very well, but that was something that he didn't care about. Both the demons and the fallen angels were surprised when they saw a blonde teenager with an axe in his hand and flashing white eyes descend from the dark sky and stand in the middle of them all. They all stared at him without being able to identify him. They did not know who he was, but they did know that he was neither an angel, nor a fallen, and much less a demon. Naruto for his part looked at all the fallen angels before speaking. "Good evening, gentlemen. You think it would be possible for any of you to explain to me what is happening here?" he asked as he looked at the black-winged men. "Who the hell are you? Are you one of those demon lovers?" asked one of the fallen angels while frowning. "No, I am just a humble passer-by that passed through the place and I stopped to see what happened, that is all," he replied kindly. "Then I suggest you continue with your path before you end up dead together with these dirty demons," another fallen angel said as he created a spear of light and aimed it at the blonde. Naruto looked at the man who spoke before looking at the demons behind him. "Are you all right?" I asked, making them both nod. "Hey, you're listening to me," the fallen angel shouted, only to be ignored by Naruto, who was still talking to the demons behind him. The man became completely angry at being ignored by the phenomenon in front of him. Looking at his men, he nodded. Naruto, although he was ignored the man, he had not stopped seeing him from the corner of his eye. So when he saw how the man gave the silent order to be attacked, he raised his axe to the sky, doing so a lot of lightning they would fall on the three and form a shield which protected them from all the spears of light. All fallen angels took a step back when they saw this. They only knew one person who could do something like that. "That was very impolite of you. Perhaps you do not know that it is cowardly to attack a person from behind or when he is talking to another," said the god of thunder as he turned to see the man who had given the attack order. "You are Thor, the god of thunder," said a fallen, a little scared that the Nordic gods decided to join the war and side with the demons. Naruto shook his head as he slowly lowered his axe. "No, I am not Thor." "So, who are you?" the man asked, a little relieved that the blonde is not a Nordic god. He did not want to have to fight a man like Thor, who was said to be the strongest of all the Nordic gods. He was supposedly as powerful as his leader Azazel. "That does not matter now. The important thing is that I will give them a chance to retire and go home," he said as he looked the man directly in the eye. The fallen angel looked at Naruto with a smile on his face, and before the blonde could do something, he jumped back and created two spears of light in his hands. "I don't know who you are, but if you want to protect the demons so much, then why don't you die along with them?" he said as he threw his spears at the blonde. Naruto sighed, because people never listen when someone speaks to him. Raising his axe, he destroyed the first spear of light, splitting it in half horizontally. After that, he used one of his hands to take the other spear of light, which surprised everyone. "You should NT have done that," he said before crushing the light spear in his hands. "I gave them the opportunity to leave and they rejected it. Now they will die," he said, and before anyone could blink, the angel who had attacked Naruto fell to the ground. Dead, and without a head. Normally when someone's head is cut off, the blood flies everywhere as if it were a volcano erupting. But in this case the Naruto cut was clean and surgical. The blonde had covered his Stormbreaker with electricity by the time he made a cut. This will heal quickly and so the blood does not splash it. Throwing his Stormbreaker into the air, he covered his hands with electricity before pointing them at the fallen. The rays that came out of Naruto's hands pierced the body of the angels just where their hearts were, giving him a quick and painless death. Turning, the blonde was about to attack another fallen. But before that passed, he was struck in the chest by a holy ray which sent him to roll on the ground. "I admit it, that hurt a little," Naruto said as he stood up as if nothing had happened. "But now it's my turn." Jumping into the air, he took his axe and aimed it at the sky. A lightning bolt fell from the sky and landed on the blonde, thus giving him more power than he already had. Moving his Stormbreaker from left to right, Naruto caused an electric sheet to leave it. The electric sheet sailed through the air, and when it reached the ground, everything but the two demons ended up dead and headless on the ground. "Well, I am done here, so it's time to go," Naruto said after seeing that the only thing left of the fallen angels was a bunch of black feathers. "By the way, because their bodies disappear when they are killed?" asked the blonde to himself as he began to fly away. It will be because God created them so that when their bodies die they disappear and so humans do not find them and decide to experiment with their dead bodies, he kept talking to himself. Wait, Naruto stopped in the middle of his flight and his thoughts when he heard someone calling him. Looking down he saw that the person who had called him was the red-haired demon, so he descended a little more to hear what that he wanted to tell her. I want to thank you for saving my life and that of Graphia-san. My name is Sears Gremory and she is Graphia Lucifag, he said as he leaned a little with the silver-haired doing the same. It was nothing, Naruto said before turning to leave, but again he was stopped by the red-haired boy. Wait, I would like to know at least the name of my savior and that of Graphia-san, he said looking at the blonde. Naruto thought about it for a few seconds before descending completely and standing in front of the red-haired boy who in fact seemed to be the same age as him or at least in appearance as the demon slowly aged. Naruto, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. It's a pleasure, Naruto-san. I am completely grateful that you helped us. But I'd like to ask you something. You're a Nordic god, right? I asked, and making Naruto's eyes narrow a little. As you knew, the blonde asked as he tightened his grip on his Stormbreaker. Only the Norse use that type of armor. In addition, also your power is very similar to the thunder god Thor, Searsex said looking at the blonde with the axe in his hand. Of course it may also be that you are a descendant of Thor. After all, lately there have been many humans who are descendants of Nordic gods and other different gods, he said as he looked the blonde up and down. But I doubt that this is your case. Your power is too great for you to be a descendant of Thor. There is also the theory that you may be a bearer of sacred gear. That would explain your armor and your great power over the thunder element. Naruto stared at the redhead for a few seconds in silence. He is a very intelligent person. He discovered what I am with a simple look, thought as he looked at the smiling redhead. I see. But yes, you're right. I am a Nordic. But I am not a god. That is impossible. Your power is too great not to be a god, said the woman as she opened her eyes a little. My power may be as great as that of a Nordic god, but that is all, he said as he looked at both of them with his flashing eyes, so if you'll excuse me, I have to go. Searsex nodded as he looked at the blonde. It was nice to meet you, Naruto-san, and thanks again for helping us. I hope to see each other again one day, he said with a small smile on his face. As I said before, it was nothing. As soon as we saw each other again, that may have happened as it may not, Naruto said as he began to levitate and move away from both demons again. Naruto tried to enter as quietly as possible the castle which had become his home. He did not want anyone to find out, especially Odin, that he had gone on a trip to the human world again and without his permission, since if the old man would discover it he could lock him in one of the many cells and prisons in Asgard. Sneaking out again, Naruto froze immediately when he recognized the voice of the person who had spoken. Turning, the blonde smiled nervously as he scratched the back of his neck. He. I think you got me, Thor, he said as he looked at the blonde first god of thunder. You know you are forbidden to leave Asgard without Naruto's permission, he said as he looked at the blonde severely. I just went for a little walk. Asgard is an amazing place and everything, but I wanted to travel around the human world a little and see how much had changed since the last time, that is all. Naruto said as he looked at the older blonde. He really loved to Asgard, but he could not spend all his time locked in him. He had to stretch his legs and get to know the world a little. There was also the fact that since he got the Stormbreaker he had not been able to find anyone to fight apart from Thor and a few warriors, since nobody wanted to face him, and that was boring him a little. Being here all the time is a bit boring. Not to mention that we don't have cable television yet, he tried to joke a little. Thor looked at the blonde before approaching him and placing a hand on his shoulder. I understand you, Naruto, believe me, but you can't go out that way by yourself, he said, making Naruto lower his head a little. Next time I will accompany you to learn how to escape from here without being discovered entering or leaving, he said, causing Naruto to open his eyes and raise his head quickly. Really? Asked the blonde, a little astonished by what the man said. Thor nodded as he looked around. I was also a young Naruto adventurer. And like you, I wanted to see the world and face strong opponents. But over time I understood that my place was here in Asgard. Especially when the three factions war broke out. But that it does not mean that I still do not sneak at night as you do, so I will teach you how to do it without anyone or Odin or Heimdall noticing, he said as he looked back at the blonde. Placing his arm around the blonde's shoulder, he started walking with the blonde. Now come on, I want you to tell me everything you've been doing. Naruto nodded with a smile on his face as he let his companion god guide him. Thanks for watching.